He's here. John Marriott, so he's running a little bit.
That would be. Certainly have a part of their set.
Market price things. So we had two covering 15 minutes. Well. Okay.
Because we're one shot, aren't we?
Yeah, okay. Is anybody on the phone from the phones?
You heard from Joe?
Haven't heard from Joe, but John and John are on their way. They'll be about
Fired
15
Joe.
minutes late.
Okay. We'll get underway here. We're a couple of board members short to have the quorum, but the couple of them are on the way. They're just late. So we're gonna open up with public comment, which is our norm from the phones and that. And then if there's time after, we'll obviously open it up for another round of discussion after the presentations here tonight. Okay, so that said, we don't know about Joe. John and John are just late. Okay, so we're one short. Do we have folks on the phone?
We have no one signed up virtually, so if you're listening online and you'd like to make public comment, please chat the host, but, you can open up the room.
There's no one on the phones. Anyone in the room would like to make an opening comment?
Maybe afterwards we will.
I'm sure afterwards you will. Everybody's okay? We can, go ahead.
Are we touching on JSX at all tonight?
I don't think so.
Not, no. Oh, we can if you have
Yeah.
a comment.
Talking about it, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to find out if you guys have any updates, because I don't. And it affects me, so that's why I'm here. I don't know if you have any increase. I've heard that they're bringing some maintenance staff. Obviously, we know about the Air Star we've talked about, but they are bringing on maintenance staff to operate some of their own ground equipment when they do get it. That is supposedly going to happen in a couple of months' time, in which we'll take care of that in the meantime. So I've heard from some staff that in 1 month they're adding additional flights. I've heard from their general manager who lives on the East Coast but oversees BJC. He said that it's not going to happen unless he calls and tells me. But then I've heard 1 month and 2 months. So I just didn't know if the airport knows or if there's anything that you can share or if I should just talk to you after this.
So there's nothing I know. They do want to add flights. They do want to add flights this year. But nothing is scheduled, nothing is hard, you know. I think the two issues in my discussions with JSX are getting planes is their number one issue, so having planes to add those routes. And then the second one is to find locations that are suitable. So for example, early on, they wanted to go to Chicago. They still want to go to Chicago out of this location. That's their number one dream.
Yeah.
They cannot find, they don't want to fly into O'Hare because it's too busy to, but they can't find a suitable, that has facilities that are suitable for their operation. So, that's where they're at. Nothing, they want to expand, but nothing is planned. And I will let you know if I hear anything different.
Thank you.
Yep. Jason, how are you?
Good, bye. Anything else? Not at the moment? I guess we'll get started with let's do the minutes. Everybody see the
You
minutes?
gotta have everybody get up.
Yeah, we do. We'll have to move that to the end.
And I'm trying to help Joe Morales get in.
Oh, okay.
Oh, once he's on, we can't.
Yeah. Did y'all get the minutes and take a look?
I have-
We got time? Anybody got a question?
Is Joe in some hunting blind and can't get good connection?
He's needing a link.
He's probably in the sky. He's probably.
Questions come up about the trailers. What kind of trailers? Yeah.
What trailers? Are you talking about the registration of trailers? All so we were getting complaints about abandoned equipment, tracking, just different things around the airport. So we had our staff who, if you guys saw Joel, the very large gentleman that was in here that works for me, he was tasked with going out and taking pictures and getting stuff cleaned up. He did a fantastic job, especially over by the legacy ramp and having them cut the grass, getting rid of trash and all that stuff. In the meantime, I think we found, and don't quote me on this number, like 38 unregistered, some untagged trailers. The minimum, the rules and regs say it has to be for airplane use or aviation use. We took a long, hard look at it. We had conversations with people who had trailers that were clearly car trailers, but they're like, hey, we bring in our fuel and 50-gallon drums on this. Hey, we brought a wing, and I said, okay. So and to make sure that we are managing that and people aren't dropping off their old crappy trailers, you get for any trailer, to include the barbecue cooker right here in the back, which is a trailer, $25 for life. You get a registration and a sticker that goes on your trailer. So that way, when my staff goes by, they can see that sticker. They can actually enter it into the system that we have that covers our badging and says, oh, that trailer belongs to Daryl. It's legit. He paid his registration. Let's leave it alone. What that will do is then allow us to get rid of these junk trailers that shouldn't be on the airport.
Trailers in the hangar, does it have to be registered?
I will say no, but if you pull it out and you leave it over the weekend and my guys see it and it's not registered, it's gonna get dragged away. So it's in your trailer and you feel pretty confident that you're gonna manage that, that's on you. Or you could get $25 and then if it's Friday night and you're tired and you wanna go home and you're like, I don't wanna look at the trailer.
Those
You can
trailers that, hold lighters, is that a trailer?
I mean, that's aviation, so I would say yes.
Yeah, those are not my trailers.
And so that's the kind of stuff, right? We've gotten these junk trailers with no tires on them, we've gotten abandoned vehicles, motorcycles, cars and things like that. If you guys remember before, JSX, I mean, long before they showed up, there was 30, 40 cars that were abandoned in that lot.
I've
That
got
we,
one on right now.
Yep.
She's ready to take care of it.
so it's just a way to keep, appropriate vehicles on the airport, and so, and again, it's $25, you get a lifetime sticker wears out, we give you a new one, you're in the system. Cause what, Mark Johnson and I had a conversation, he's like, I've been through this 6 times, 6 different airport directors over 20 years. And I was like, well, if I leave, hopefully not too soon, the next director me like, let's get rid of these trailers. Well, now you're in the system and we don't have to go through that. So it's just an organized way to manage that.
What about RVs, motorhomes?
That is not allowed. And the reason being is RVs tend to all of a sudden have people living in them. Pretty hard to live on a flatbed, auto hauler in the winter and the summer, but RVs and boats, we do not allow, if you were to come and say, hey, I'm leaving on a trip on Monday, can I bring my RV and park it outside my hangar for, 2 days, and you let my staff know, we're absolutely gonna let you do that. But what we don't want is RVs parked here because people end up living in them. And we're not an RV park, we are an aviation.
You're gonna live in, pull it in the hangar.
Yeah. Till I catch you. Alright,
So we do have 2 online, Brad Walker and Joshua Cooper. So
Okay.
if they're
Did we close out? We did more than 3 minutes on trailers.
What's like the location of all your cameras? Is there any in our hangars?
no comment.
You should be able to see that one.
Let's tee up the first one there.
All right, so Brad Walker, I've got you registered for public comment and I'm unmuting you.
Okay, you there, Brad?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Just want to say, just want to thank everyone for keeping up the good work, looking out for GA. I think the plan for trailers is a good one and seems pretty reasonable. The only feedback I would have at this moment is it'd be kind of nice if we could get the recordings posted on the website. That'd be really helpful. But otherwise, let's make sure we keep GA in the focus or in our thoughts as we move forward with the runway and the expansion and hangars. But otherwise, good job, everyone. So thanks very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks.
And next I have Joshua Cooperman and I'm unmuting you.
Joshua, you there? Oh, you got an open line there?
Question, dude.
Joshua, you with us?
In the meantime. Yeah,
See you in a moment.
Okay. And Joe's online now? Can you unmute Joe?
Hello, Mr. Ramos.
Yes, I could officially talk. I
Good
talked
to hear you,
to
Justin.
Ben was keeping me in restriction. I had to be messaging him saying, hey, I'm locked out. I'm locked out.
A lot of multitasking here.
All right, so we lost Joshua.
I think yep.
Okay, well, then we'll move on to the minutes on the agenda item. So we're to approve the minutes from last meeting.
One edit, the adjourn time was 5:40, not 6:40. But other than that.
Good eye to detail.
Wow.
All right, and any other changes? That somebody got? I didn't catch that one. Okay, and motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Joe, minutes okay for you, Joe?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now we have a quorum, so we move on to the rest of the business items. First one up.
So we want to do from say this. We've spoken to a lot of industry experts. We brought in Fuel, we brought in the FAA, we brought in different companies that sell, manufacture, talk about, we brought in the flight schools. Leaded fuel and the use of it is a huge topic. So we wanted to present to the board and to anyone who's listening, the steps that we're actually taking to move through that process. So what is, low lead or 100 lead or avgas? That is the fuel that is approved by the FAA to go into most single engine prop planes. There are a few other planes that use, automobile gasoline, but approximately 10% of our fuel is sold at 100 low lead here. The rest is Jet A. That's what goes into the business jets. That's what goes into like JSX. The vast majority of piston engine are certified to use 100 low lead. And it's sold by both FBOs on the field and recognized nationally as a standard for aviation gasoline. What's important to note as we go through this, we'll call it a conversion to the unleaded fuel, is that is basically a picture of a fueling service port on an Cessna 172. Talks about avgas only. Then in the pilot handbook, it talks about using unapproved fuels, because if you put the wrong fuel into the wrong plane or your plane that does not certified for that fuel, it will damage the engine, which could cause you to come out of the sky. So as we talk about this conversion, safety is paramount above everything else. And that's why it's led by the FAA and it's led by the EPA. It is not led by town councils, county commissioners, airport, directors. This is a federal program that is basically scheduled to occur by 2030. That's what the federal program says. It's called EAGLE. Those are the Google warriors that want to look that up. It's EAGLE. Next slide. So how do we transition away from 100 low lead? Well, first and foremost, there's has to be developed a safe alternative that is approved by the FAA, and that has occurred. That FAA approval has come for two manufacturers. It's Swift Manufacturing, which makes a 94 unleaded, and GAMI, which just got approved, I think it was in September, a 100 unleaded, and that's 100 octane versus 94 octane. What's required next is specific aircraft approval, which is a type certificate that you have to go out and get from the FAA. That's available and ongoing. As important is the infrastructure. There's not millions of gallons of this fuel laying around waiting to be distributed. It's not being refined quickly enough to support nationwide operations. So that, again, is in development. And then airport and specifically FBO infrastructure investment is required because, next slide, we'll talk about the Swift fuel, and then we'll talk about the GAMI fuel and kind of what the difference is. So Swift is the name of the company. They make the 94 unleaded. It's approved through a supplemental type certificate. That's what I said, is required. It's a paperwork process that you get, from the FAA. And it's a drop-in replacement, and it's important that we note right here, lower compression aircraft engines. So it is not available and it's not approved for 100% of piston aircraft. It's only approved for about 66%. That supplemental type certificate requires the installation of placards and a pilot handbook entry into the page, like the previous slide. There's a lot of talk about Swift being implemented and Centennial switching to unleaded fuel. That Swift 94 will be implemented at Centennial this summer by one of the 3 FBOs. And they have a flight school that's signed on that says our aircraft all use it. We have one type of aircraft and we're going to switch over. So they have a demand brought in. It's also important to notice that they sell 18 million gallons of fuel and they're going to use, one flight school. So it's going to help and it's moving in the right direction. But again, when people say, well, Centennial's switching and you're not, why not? Well, they're adding a capacity for unleaded fuel, but they're not switching. They are also working to develop a 100 unleaded octane unleaded fuel for deployment by the end of 2025. Next slide. So GAMI is the other company, and GAMI's 100 unleaded is approved through a supplemental type certificate as a drop-in replacement in all spark ignition piston engine and airframes in the FAA's type certificate database. That's a lot of FAA verbiage to say pretty much every piston aircraft can use this fuel. So you're not worried about possibly having a plane that's not able to use the Swift. This one is good for all. This also requires the installation of placards in a pilot handbook installation. They have partnered, so GAMI has partnered with AvFuel, and the AvFuel rep came and talked to Greg, Ben, and I a couple days ago to talk about this. But that partnership is meant to oversee the logistics of production and distribution, but all legitimate suppliers of G100 will receive non-discriminating pricing. So what that says is, if you're an FBO with a partnership with AvFuel, they're not just going to go, hey, sorry, we're not going to support you. They'll support anybody, which is, I think, is important, again, because not all the FBOs use AvFuel. They use different suppliers. That will be more widely acceptable and usable in the market in the coming years, probably in about 2024. Currently, and again, this is industry experts. It's not websites. It's not news releases. They are saying it's going to go to California first and work its way westbound. Currently, is it the Swift that's being marketed in or sold and made in California? Or is it the GAMI? I forget.
Swift's Indiana and California.
So Swift is being made in California and it's also being refined in Indiana. So those are the two basic points of this being done. Thanks for remembering that. Next slide. So what's the difference? The Swift 94 is available now in small quantities. For GAMI, it's about 2 to 3 years out. For Colorado, again, it's going to California first and will work eastbound from there. They both require an STC. Swift is approved for 66% of the fleet. GAMI 100 is approved for all piston engines. It does create, and this is something we had a very long discussion with the distributor, is there is a risk of unapproved fuel placed in higher compression aviation engines. And I'm going to let Greg talk about that when he speaks, but there is a risk, and it's a real risk. And if we do this, planes will come out of the sky because the engines will get damaged. So that's something we have to think about and how we manage that system so that we're not putting the wrong fuel. And then for the GAMI, it's a complete replacement for the 100 low lead and all air, and it basically eliminates that risk of misfueling because you can basically dump it in. You can also, which is another distinction, you can add that. So if you have, say we have the GAMI 100 here and you fill up and you fly to Kansas and they don't have it, you can then go back to the leaded fuel, top off, come back, and so you can max that in your plane.
There's no risk of mixtures.
There's no risk of mixers, right? Now, again, what I've been told is The FBOs don't want that liability for any misfueling, anything, so they're gonna keep it 100% separate. So they're not gonna say, oh, well, when this stuff stops running, we'll just start dumping it in our tanks, and they wanna keep it separate because, again, this is a brand new product. There's liability that could be incurred, so they're gonna be very careful and very safe about that. Is that an incorrect statement?
No, that's not incorrect, that's.
Thank you, Greg.
Oh, did the distributor give you any idea about cost difference between the two fuels?
I think that's on our next slide, is it?
Okay.
Or go on the next slide, unless you change it on me.
$1.30 a gallon.
Yeah, it's like a buck.
No, it's actually
15%.
somewhere between $4, so the Swift fuel is somewhere between $4 and $5 more per gallon.
Yes.
So here's, and again, this came from, you can go to the websites and people are gonna say, oh, Paul said this, and it's a lie, because I get that a lot. It came from the distributor who's partnered with GAMI, and they're supplying the Swift fuel. And we spoke to Centennial, who's ordered Swift fuel. The Centennial director told us it's about $4 more. The Avfuel distributor said it's about $5 more a gallon.
So
So,
it's in low volume because I
Yeah.
think George Brayley has suggested, who owns GAMI Fuels, that the ultimate target is to be within about 15% of the cost of under.
yeah, and again,
Once it's
as,
at the right
as
Yeah.
supply ramps up, prices are gonna come down.
You're looking at demand
But
versus.
the demand has to come in. So that's, I mean, again, that's important because that's where someone will Google that and say, oh, you're a liar, that's only 15% more eventually. Right now, I got it from two sources of what they're actually charging. So we have two FBOs on this field. They both have fuel trucks and fuel tanks for the 100 low lead. The unleaded fuel will require installation of new tanks and purchases of new trucks. So you can't take an existing truck. I mean, you could strip it out, clean it, sanitize it, and then switch it over, but you can't switch back and forth that fuel. So a truck is roughly $140,000 for an FBO to buy. Tanks are, I don't know how, to be honest, I don't know how much tanks cost because we're trying to get a FAA grant for that. So what the airport is doing is we're actually working with the FAA to get grants to install. They would be airport owned because FAA can't buy it for the FBOs, of which we would then lease for, zero to no cost to the FBOs for, a certain length of time during this transition period before that fuel became, profitable and actually usable for the FBOs without, taking a huge financial hit. So hopefully we get that funding, we can buy tanks and trucks. They've already said they would do tanks and we're going through the process of getting that. Trucks is another different thing now. We're kind of in the FBO business and again, we have to lease those trucks. So it's federal government, we're working. All this stuff takes time, but we are going through it.
Can I ask you a question about the truck thing? Do the FBOs have one fuel truck apiece or?
No, I think they have a couple.
I don't know how many signatures, I think they have the same amount, but I have 200 low lead trucks, 750 capacity and a 1200 capacity.
Thank
One
you.
which is hand cranked, which nobody likes, right?
How many total trucks do you have?
Total trucks, I have 5, 3 Jet A's and dependent on JSX operations, there might be a chance of getting a 4th one. So I have 6 trucks.
So, again, that's a significant investment for a company. Again, it'd be great if the FAA would basically say, hey, we're gonna do this for everybody. It's just the transition, ultimately gets the infrastructure in place as that fuel becomes readily available, like David mentioned.
None of this is Jet A. This is all just replacing that 100.
Yes.
What's our split on fuel of Jet A versus?
90% JA, 10%.
So what we're talking about here is 10% of our fuel. Okay, I just
Yes.
got that.
Why are we doing this?
Why are we doing what?
Going to no lead?
It's gonna be mandated by the FAA and the EPA by 2030 anyway,
Okay, why? I'm just curious.
because lead is a forever poison.
Lawsuits that we've had in the recent past, like in California, is that part of this?
Probably. I'm
And
not-
there's people screaming about us spraying lead on them.
Yeah, tetraethyl lead is is a known problem, right? I mean, it's highly toxic. So the
So it's
EPA.
a real deal.
It is.
Yeah.
And you can't purge it from your body, just
Right.
once you're exposed. it's there.
Now, How's this gonna relate? Ours, you know, at one time had to add lead when they switched over to a lot of engines. Did you know that? They had to pour lead into.
To raise the octane, that's why lead
So-
in it now, it raises the octane level.
So how is it gonna affect aircraft engines when you take that away?
Well, the new unleaded fuels have a new chemistry that you're taking lead out, but you're adding other chemicals to increase the octane without lead.
Okay.
The other thing that lead does is it increases the length of the burn. So you don't have that hot spike and come down, hot spike and come down as those pistons are firing. It keeps that RPM steady. So the chemicals that GAMI and Swift are working on replaces the lead.
Lead's been on the EPA list for years, and it, you know, it went through paint. In fact, even old houses, you want to remodel, you gotta take the old paint out, handle it. So we're just now getting down from the big users of lead to the small ones, and that's where we are.
Yeah, I think you have gas in the last leaded. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Next slide. So now I'm gonna turn this over to Greg. I think everybody here knows Greg Boom. He's the owner and operator of one of the largest flight schools on the airport, and is a big help to us as an airport staff, as to all of you, most of you, and he may work on your planes. He was instrumental in working with the advisory board on the noise and the voluntary procedures, and he's been helping us with the lead. So off to you, Greg.
Thanks, Paul. Just real quick, for people that don't know me, I started flying out of here in 1983. And then I got my mechanic's license in 88, 89. Started working as a mechanic on the field here. In 1999, I started my own maintenance shop. And then in 2008, I started flight school. Currently, I think I'm up to 30, gotta count, 35 or 36 airplanes in the flight school. So it's a pretty good size fleet. We're all, as pilots, we're all looking forward to kind of getting rid of the, leaded fuel, but that's what we have to work with right now. I've been doing a lot of research on studying on this. They started doing the work for unleaded fuels back in like 2010, 2012. And so this has been ongoing for a while. This is not something that's brand new. They've been working on it. And as Paul showed, there was two different companies, GAMI, which has an approval by an STC, and the Swift fuels. For my flight school, I wanted to say something about that. I have certain high performance airplanes that the 100 low unleaded will work with any of my airplanes. And it's designed to work with any of those airplanes. The problem is getting it refined and getting it to us is probably a good 2 to 3 year process. And we're looking forward to that. That's going to be nice when it actually is here and we can start using it properly. The 94 UL, I know they're talking about using it at a flight school down at Centennial. But for my flight school, that won't work. I have high performance airplanes. I have a 310, I have Arrows, I have other aircraft, 182s that cannot use that. It's not approved for it, and it can damage the engine. It actually can cause detonation, damage the engine. You have an off-field landing. So for me, the 94 UL would not work with my fleet of aircraft at this time. We definitely keep researching and looking into it as far as that goes. And the cost of the STC, I'm probably looking, if I get STCs for all my flight school planes, probably in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. They're doing it basically $2 per horsepower. So one of my airplanes has got 260 horsepower aside, so 520 horsepower. So that's going to be $1,000 for that airplane roughly. So there's some variable costs there. I don't have an issue paying for that, and actually the airport's offered to help with that a little bit as far as getting it transitioned over when the fuel becomes available to us. So I think it's great. I think it's neat that it's coming down the pipeline. It's just gonna take a little bit of time for us to get all the infrastructure, get the tanks, get the trucks, have all the FPOs work together and stuff like that. And it's gonna be exciting to see it come down the road, and I think it's gonna work out really well. So we'll see what the long-term effects are as far as engines and fuel systems, but we'll work through that as the time comes and things go on, because this will be coming down the road. It will get changed, and we'll see it. The one thing I'd like to add is I've been to quite a few of these meetings. We've been doing the noise roundtable for 4 or 5 years now. We've done a lot of work on it. We've really tried hard. And, I know there's a lot of townspeople that were discouraged with how things were going and things like that. I'm offering myself, if there was like an hour prior to the next month's meeting, if any of the people superior or anybody would like to, maybe ask questions or stuff. I know a lot about the fuels. I know a lot about the operations of the airport. I know about the noise, like the research thing as far as if you want to do a noise study. I've talked to the FAA, we've had meetings on this stuff, I know what's involved. So if anybody wants to maybe come an hour early prior to the next meeting and have a question to answer, I'd be more than happy to have my time and present that and work with the public and the general people to answer any of these questions or explain things better, or as best I can. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that. One comment first. So one of the things I was misquoted about 50 times this week was, I had told the commissioners that for a flight school to transition their flight, it takes about $10,000 to $15,000 to do all their planes. That was misconstrued because people weren't listening closely to what I actually said. And they were saying, it doesn't cost $10,000, it's, $200. So again, Greg backed it up. I've talked to 3 of the flight schools. They've all said to do this for our entire fleet is somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000. So I want to make that very clear that I'm pretty good at what I do. I've been doing this for about 35 years, and I rarely make mistakes. I made 2 in my life.
Paul, I have a question. This might be for Greg. What's the, how extensive of a process and how long does it take for you to get STCs for all your aircraft to be able to use the new
Yes,
fuel?
I did talk to GAMI, on the phone, and they would send me out the paperwork and information. It'd take a couple days to get to me. Then I would fill out a form. They call it a 337, which is a major alteration, form. I would fill that out. Then they have, placards that go on the wings and then also a paper that goes in the airplane. I estimate probably realistically take me probably an hour per airplane labor wise to, go through each airplane. So, probably about 34, 35 hours or so to do each one and proper document.
Okay, thank you.
Let me make the point, anybody that's not aviation, most of these people here are aviation related, but I know of nobody, and I don't think the aviation people here know of anybody dragging their feet on converting to that fuel. We want it as bad as anybody and as soon as anybody. Now, the big hurdle's over because the government has approved the STCs and they're working on some other items that'll improve it. The nice part about what's going on is that private enterprise does the fuel and they make the fuels, and there's a big push right now for those people to grab a share of that business. And so what we thought might take 5, 6, 7 years to implement looks like it could be done in about 2 years because of these people. So we're making great progress.
Is there any grants for people such as Greg, maybe yourself, you might have this answer, for converting your fleet over to these fuels? Because I mean, $15,000 for a fleet, I'm sure that's a decent hit if you're gonna try to convert that over to the entire aircraft. So is the FAA or anybody giving grants out for that kind of conversion?
They're not giving grants, but Paul has offered to help a little bit as far as the airport's concerned to transition this over.
I'm assuming that's for flight schools, not private owners.
So we'll start with flight schools, but the way we're doing it is if, for example, if Greg's conversion was a $15,000, we would work with him to give a $15,000 rent reduction over a year.
Gotcha.
So basically the airport's paying for it.
Yeah.
If individual pilots wanted to make that change, we would do the same thing with their lease. We just say, hey, for an individual pilot, it's $100. So we'd say 1 month and you're $100 down.
Right.
But it's the flight schools that have the large thing that we probably spread out over, anywhere less than a year.
And the important thing is, and you know this, but there is no conversion to the airplane. Once approved, this is a paperwork thing. So once you get the paperwork, pay the fuel, you're converted. We're only waiting for the fuel now.
Do we anticipate any benefits or bad things for our money?
Time will tell.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we're just gonna have to use it, operate it, and see if we come with issues. There could be potential issues. There's 3 different types of fuel tanks: aluminum, wet wing with sealants, and bladders. We don't know long-term effects. 20 years down the road how it'll affect it, but I think we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get to it.
But you know, there's also some upside though. You're not gonna have lead fouling.
Spark plugs won't have lead fouling. So,
And this isn't new, they've been tested.
they've been testing this for 12 years now.
Yeah, over a decade.
Yeah.
Gammy knows how to test stuff.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
They're
I
pretty sure.
think they've done a great job.
Yeah.
I really do.
So again, this, and I think Randy's point was probably, spot on where, you know, that we have till 2030. The industry is saying 2 to 3 years, but as private industry kicks in and these big oil companies are like, hey, we want a part of that business, we think that's gonna even get shorter. The whole thing relies on infrastructure though. You've gotta refine the gas, you gotta have the trucks to move it, you've gotta have the tanks to store it, you've gotta have the tanks or the trucks to then move it to the aircraft. So, it's moving for the federal government at the speed of light, which is rare. But you're gonna see big things moving relatively fast here in the next, 24 months.
Everybody's aligned. They
Yeah,
all want the same thing.
all right. Thanks, Greg. Great job.
Cheers.
For the board, any more questions on the lead or anything we can answer?
Well, quick, you've been talking to both the manufacturers, the fuel people. Do we anticipate having both on the field at some point, or will we want to? It sounds like GAMI is the favored one just because it covers everybody, meaning aircraft operators.
Yeah.
So,
I think the safety issue with having 94 UL on the field and somebody misfueling a high performance engine is kind of a high risk right now. So until people really understand it and are used to it, I think it'd be best to shoot for the 100 LL unleaded, because in that way, there's not a high risk of misfueling or having a problem with an aircraft.
You're also looking at the FBOs taking on that risk, is what you said earlier, and I can tell you, we're not gonna do that. If you provide that fuel, I ain't buying it.
So here's, Greg, can you explain how your planes are fueled as the discussion that we had?
So, my planes are fueled, every evening they come over with the fuel trucks. It's basically kind of on demand, but what they'll do is they'll drive through my entire fleet and they'll top off the fleet, so the next morning the planes are ready to fly. There's certain airplanes that I have that are on request only. They got long range tanks or maybe a twin engine airplane where they want to just add a certain amount of fuel. So, but all the trainer planes, Warriors, Archers, 152s, 172s, they top them off at the end of the day and then they're ready to go the next morning. So it's easy for them, it's easy for us, and the people could fly. So the potential of having something misfueled with a lower octane fuel is so high that I do not want to take that risk. I think it, like you said, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
I have 152s that have high performance engines that are 125 horsepower because they require compression pistons. Well, that fuel won't work with that engine, but it's a little trainer, 2-seat trainer.
Right.
And so it would be really high risk.
Well, if the 94 cost more, what would be the benefit?
There would be no benefit. It would have to be subsidized.
It would have to be subsidized, and that's what Centennial's doing. They're subsidizing, the STCs, which is what we're going to do. They're gonna subsidize for a length of time. People who do use the fuel, they're gonna make up the difference. They have basically a $4 million grant from the FAA that they didn't think they were gonna have. So the money they saved up for that project, they're gonna use to subsidize this. But you're right, when it's $4 to $5 more a gallon, it's very tough. But that aside, because I know you guys are all greenies, and would do it because it's the goodness of your heart. The reality is, it's the risk. And spent, basically 30 years with the Marine Corps and having seen everything, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, when there's a guy who's been working all day long and he goes down the flight line and he's topping off planes, he's not gonna just think about, oh, this one's high compression, he's just gonna go through it, and that's where the risk is. So,
Complacency is what the issue is too.
to answer your original question, Phil, the airport is leaning towards just going straight to the 100, because the infrastructure to get the grants, to buy the tanks, to do all that, to buy the trucks, there's at least a 6-month waiting list if you were to purchase a new one. that timeline almost works out to say, and we think the GAMI project's gonna be ready sooner anyway. Not to say that we won't consider and always look through every option of using the 94, but right now, we're looking at, we have to get the infrastructure in, the infrastructure lines up with the 100. We remove that safety risk, and so that's how we're gonna proceed.
The
Are you
misfueling
expecting
grant,
an FAA grant for this? Is that what? I just-
For the tanks.
For the tanks.
So we've been, FAA's a fickle beast, but we've been told that we would qualify and that we would be one of the first ones to be able to get, it's called an AIG grant, not an AIP. AIP is what they use to do the runways and stuff. For the tanks, we went back and said, well, the tanks are great, but if the FBOs have to buy a $140,000 truck, they're gonna have a tank full of gas with no way to move it. So they're going back to check with DC and go through the rules and see if we can get grants for the trucks.
Unfortunately, I can't share my source, but a very, very senior industry official that's, that I talked to a lot, not connected to GAMI, feels very strongly that GAMI is really where this is all headed, just from a lot of different reasons. That technical parts of the fuel, the things that we're talking about, the misfuel, just the entire picture. There's a lot of belief that that's who will come out.
the misfueling risk is real. As we know, for years, we've had low lead and jet, and yet we continue over these years to have mishaps where jet fuel's been put in piston aircraft. We've had crashes, we've had engines destroyed. Now we're gonna have a third fuel for the FBO to worry about. And so it's very important that they be cautious of how we do this and the transition.
I mean, we're talking about typical Cessnas and Vipers and Beechcraft, right? But then there's a whole swath of these airplanes and different planes that people don't even know what they are and what engine's in that airplane.
All right. Good.
And I had one other question. I might have missed this early on, but is it the view that eventually over time, this unleaded will completely replace the low lead? It's by 2030. Do we have any idea how long that might take once it starts becoming available on the ramp? Is that, how long will it be on the field that there would be low lead and unleaded and Jet A, three fuels available? How long would that be? It would seem like that would be a relatively short period of time.
So I believe, and I'll let Greg back that up, and the other Greg too. Once we make that switch to the 100, the leaded fuel will pretty much go away. I mean, there's no reason to keep it, right?
Well, I actually think, I think you're gonna start seeing this fuel, but it will be produced in low volume
Limited
at first.
quantities.
Once they can produce this fuel in the volume that you can under low lead, I think it's something like 60,000 gallons per day, or maybe it's barrels per day. But there's a number like
Sure.
that.
There'll be
We
no
produce in
reason,
the
no
US
risk for it.
100 low lead. Once it can be produced in that level of volume, and the economics are reflected, I think it'll be completely replaced
Mhm.
100 low lead.
Yeah, because that would seem to be the ideal situation is rather than three options on the field,
Yeah.
which exponentially changes those misfueling issues, rather than that it'd be just two options, and the sooner it can get to two options, the better.
As soon as it's produced, widely distributed, that's when you'll see the political.
And so from
pressures
John
come.
and David, thank you for that clarification, because again, it is about the supply, right?
Right.
We're not gonna switch over and then I can't fly any planes.
Yeah.
Greg's
'Cause there's
green,
no
because there's no fuel.
Yeah.
It has to have enough supply to meet the demand, so.
Yeah.
You're looking at viability of cost too for a private owner or even a fleet to switch over that as well. So if you're paying $5 more a gallon and you have the option for 100 low lead or unlead,
You're gonna probably.
you're gonna go with the cheaper option.
Sure.
So, and I would imagine that maybe unleaded fuel would probably be taken on by self-serve first and foremost. Those are small 500-gallon tanks or less typically. So if you have an airport with one of those, guaranteed that'd be the first spot it would go if an FBO is not gonna take on that risk first.
I would never accuse a pilot of pencil whipping their log, but I can see a lot of future guys using low lead or losing the new fuel without having the SCT. Is that, I would assume there's gonna be some type of regulation to check that on annuals, but who knows what they're using?
So to go a little bit further from what Greg said, when the App Fuel guy was here, he's like, yeah, I can get you a 500-gallon tote within 3 weeks. And I said, great, let's do it. Let's put it self-serve. And he's like, well, the problem is you gotta get a pump and a filter and the infrastructure to do that. And now you've got 2 pumps sitting set, even though one's a, white tank like this and one would be kind of a metal square. He goes, do you really want the risk of a pilot pulling up after a long flight? He's tired. He sees 2 hoses. He does that. And so again, it's, ultimately we have to go the safe route, the conservative route. We are moving extremely quick as an industry. Again, not just this airport, but across the whole aviation industry. And we're making huge progress.
It seemed like the 94 would be a poor risk for cross-country travel. You don't know what fuel is going to be available to you once you depart from home.
Yeah, right now, the 94 unleaded is only available in about 20 locations in the country. So it's
I've been to one.
Yeah, you can't mix that.
No,
You can mix the gammy, but you can't mix the smooth nitrogen.
Good. Thank you for the rich commentary. It's always good.
So, the advisory board for, I think it was 3 months, talked and considered and looked at the runway 321 with the financial situation that the FAA is not funding it. They recommended that we get a consultant to kind of do a deeper dive, take a look at the financials, look at some options, try to come up with some conclusions of what is the realm of the possible. So with that, Jim Miklas here is from Javiation, a Wolpert company.
Thank you.
And a good friend of the airport and myself personally. And he's gonna kind of go through his presentation that we've been working on. So Jim, with that?
All right, perfect. And just to clarify, how much time do we have? I'm like my
We got
third
an hour.
coffee here. How fast do I need to go? Because I can go quick.
We have, are we an hour meeting or a 2 hour?
An hour.
You got 10 minutes.
I think we have a long.
Yeah, we have an hour. I told my wife I'd be home by 7:30, so
We
that's,
started 20 minutes late though.
yeah.
Okay, all right, perfect. Well, we last, again, for the record, I'm Jim Miklas with Javiation, a Wolpert company. We had been charged by the airport to provide a planning study related to the challenge that we're facing right now with runway 321 and what those alternatives might be in order to address the situation. We've approached it from a professional planning perspective, looking at it really from a master planning type of perspective. We factor in all of the FAA regulations, requirements and the like. So we're looking at this very much as an analysis that's providing you all with factual information, and so that we can frame the discussion as the FAA would look at it, as the airport should be looking at it, as you all should be looking at it. So briefly, forgive me, is the report going to be made available into
Sent to
the board?
yeah, and it's actually attached to the
Okay,
agenda.
right,
on our
perfect.
website.
So this is a highlight of that. There's a lot of information in that draft report, but I'm just going to touch on a few of those things just to kind of set the stage for it. But, the challenge that we're facing right now with 321 is that the pavement is deteriorating quickly and needs to be reconstructed. And there's a variety of different options we can look at in terms of how we address that. What our charge was to look at it through the lens of making sure that we are being responsible and that we're balancing considerations with respect to safety, with fiscal responsibility of the airport, as well as looking at the long-term development goals of the airport as codified in the strategic business plan. A couple of the key factors that we've considered in this analysis is obviously the safety benefit that the runway provides to the airport and to the operators. There is a high cost of reconstruction though, let's be honest. The inflation is driving a lot of costs through the roof. We just had a bid opening up in Eagle that we couldn't even get bids on because things have gone through had gotten so expensive, they've had to extend that bid process because of the high costs associated with it. As Paul had mentioned, funding availability across one runways is little to not available. The FAA would never say it's not eligible, but the fact is with the amount of funding that's available from the FAA, the practical reality is as money gets filtered through all the various requirements, crosswind runways rank extremely low. The likelihood of you all receiving funding from the FAA on reconstructing that runway is negligible, to be honest. There are other projects associated with this, not just the runway. There are other elements that could potentially get factored into that, which would raise the cost. Taxiway Bravo is too close. There's hotspots associated with it, so there's a variety of other things that need to be considered. As I mentioned, the pavement is degrading quickly, and you'll see that in the next slide. And another competing interest in this discussion is the fact that you guys are becoming progressively more and more successful. There's a lot of demand for space. There's a lot of demand for room on the airport. So that's, again, another factor that needs to be factored into to the analysis. We'll go to the next one, Doug.
Real quick question is
Yes,
this,
sir.
if we looked at the deterioration from this winter recently, like with the cold we've had and kind of a lot of the moisture.
Not yet, because we're still doing snow ops today.
I'm just curious if it, this past few months, it deteriorated even more from the.
And we do we can look at a crack and we do crack seal and sort of overcoats and basic repairs. But every year in May, June, CDOT comes out and they use, thermal imaging and they actually do it for all the airports, and that's where we get a report. And so the CDOT PCI there is part of that study. So Jim, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is rooted in the CDOT pavement study. The inspections were done in 2021. At that point, the majority of the runway was rating of about a 37, which is really not very good. It's that orange area. The projection for this year, which is being reflected in that graphic up in the on the right, is in the 11 to 25 range, which is considered to be very poor condition. By 2026, according to the model, the pavement will be to a point where it could be considered to be failed at that point. At that point, the airport really does have to make a decision in terms of what to do with the runway, in terms of do we keep it open or do we close it? And that's a decision that the FAA is not going to come in and say, you've got to close the runway. It's up to the airport to make that determination. But obviously, it's ultimately the airport's responsibility to ensure that the runway is safe for people to operate on it. If it's open, there's an implication that the runway is safe. So the airport will need to make a decision when it comes to factoring things like liability and other considerations on what to do with the runway, if this projection is accurate as it was reflected in the pavement management analysis. If the runway is closed, there's some special requirements associated with that. I'll talk about that here in a second. But currently, the reconstruction costs right now are estimated loosely at about $14 million. And that includes the runway, but that also includes some work that would have to be occurring, the decommissioning of Taxiway Bravo, fixing of some of the hot spots that would be required for associated with the reconstruction of the runway. So it's a significant investment. And again, hoping for funding from the FAA is probably not going to be, it's probably not going to be there.
What's the current weight limit on that runway?
I don't know that off the top of my head. Forgive me.
But it's probably, what's that?
I can get it.
Low.
Quickly.
Yeah, so basically, it's general aviation.
It's a pretty sort of like a King Air, I think is what those.
It's a design aircraft.
So that's what, a 15,000 pound airplane?
Yeah, it's 12 to 15,000 pound range.
Reconstruction is not, the money is not there to increase that weight, only to fix it to where it is.
Only to fix it, but
Okay.
I mean, given the last rehab was done in 1988, it's not eligible really for a rehab at this point. It really does require full depth reconstruction, which is unfortunately the most expensive, version of that. Then you can go to the next slide.
And it's completely decommissioning Bravo right now. So now people have to actually go on the other side.
The
to get to
plan,
Charlie, if you were to keep it.
Charlie and or the taxi lane on this side of the airport could be utilized as, that would be reconfigured as a taxiway.
Right.
So we would need to decommission Bravo, the taxi lane becomes a taxiway because that would provide an appropriate separation, and that's what's reflected in the current airport layout plan. So just a quick highlight in terms of this is what's in the draft report. I'll touch on these individually, but just the background really is just, we went through an analysis looking at all the various planning factors that we would look at with respect to FAA criteria, master planning criteria and the like. We looked at it through the lens of operations and users and the feedback we received from various folks that are either utilizing the runway and the tower, and then some other considerations. So you can go to the next slide. Okay. So in a planning context, you just mentioned the current design standard for the runway is that of a runway design code of a B2. Again, it was based on a King Air 200. Existing runway is 75 feet wide by 3,600 feet long. It really is a GA runway. It's a crosswind, obviously the crosswind runway, and there's your pavement strength, 40,000 pound single wheel. We looked at it through the lens of the various planning studies that are available right now for the airport. The master plan's pretty dated at this point. Your most current, planning effort was the strategic business plan that you all had undertaken in 2021. We'll talk about that more in a second. But we went through the criteria that we would normally go through within a master plan. We looked at the airfield capacity and what that would mean, whether that the runway is active or decommissioned. And, highlights of that are that the airfield capacity really is not impacted actually by whether or not the runway is there, because it is intersecting the parallels. So whether that runway is there or not really doesn't impact the capacity of the runway as defined by the FAA through their advisory circulars. In terms of wind coverage, the FAA has a recommendation that wind coverage be of 95% of the time, that that runways provide 95% of coverage for particular wind speeds, crosswind wind speeds. I'm sorry, I'm not articulating it particularly well. Just know that the runway needs to have 95% coverage in terms of various wind speeds, and each one of those wind speeds is related to different types of aircraft. Bottom line for this airport, your primary runways provide the recommended wind coverage for every criteria for every type of aircraft other than small general aviation aircraft. And the deficiency on the small GA aircraft, which would be single engine aircraft, is 0.62%. So it's actually like a 94.38%. The primary runways provide that coverage. That doesn't mean that there's not benefit being driven, derived by those small aircraft, in those higher wind conditions. But just know that from the FAA's perspective, there's a small deficiency there. If funding were available for the crosswind, the FAA would only view it through the lens of that deficiency. They would only say, we would only be willing to provide funding for a runway that would provide coverage for those smallest aircraft. So, a small GA, a small single engine aircraft, maybe what needs, you had altitude, 2,100, 2,200 feet length. They would say you are eligible for maybe 2,200 feet in length by 60 feet wide, and that's all they would potentially provide funding for, if it was even available. So just know that that's how those wind coverage components get played into the discussion. With respect to airport design, we just mentioned taxiway Bravo. In its current configuration, taxiway Bravo is too close. It has to be removed if we're going to be if it's going to stay at a B2. So there's obviously costs associated with that, as well as boosting that taxi lane as reflected. It's a little bit hard to see there, but there's that blue area there that would, require additional costs. With the crosswind runway, we also have this runway visibility zone, and that's shown in those yellow dashed lines. Now that's a criteria that the FAA has had in the books for a long period of time. And the FAA has generally provided a lot of latitude for airports, particularly those airports with towers, to have some flexibility in that. The rules and requirements associated with an RVZ is that you shouldn't have anything parked, anything built, or anything located within that area. So anything that would be to the south or to the west of those lines really should be clear. You shouldn't have parked aircraft, you shouldn't have any buildings or anything like that in those areas. Now, again, the FAA has provided in the past some latitude with respect to that. If you have a tower that you're assuming the tower's, when it's in operation, that the tower is providing separation for an aircraft that's operating in the primaries. If you have a aircraft taking off on the crosswind, they provide the separation there. But just know that with the existence of that crosswind, that RVZ is there. The FAA at any point, honestly, they're becoming more rigorous. They're starting to more rigorously enforce their criteria. And so don't be surprised if the airport gets a call at some point here relatively soon to say, hey, you got to make sure that there's no aircraft parked in, within that RVZ, including the area right out in front of it here, which is a large portion of the signature ramp.
Even with the tower in operation or just after hours?
It used to be only the RVZ, it used to, even though it's always present, they would say that if the tower is operational, then you wouldn't have to abide by it. And so, but at nighttime, you would need to make sure the RVZ is clear. They've since removed that exception within the advisory circular. So while they still are not necessarily actively enforcing it, it's going to happen at some point down the line. So just recognize that all of that area that's ramp that you currently have is probably going to be off limits for parking at some point. I just wanted to note also here on that's a lot of ramp.
It's a bad day coming.
That's out there, right? Also, on the north side, I've highlighted the runway protection zone on the north end of the runway. And that runway protection zone is another design criteria that the FAA has that you're kind of grandfathered in. There's as long as the runway is up and operational, the FAA provides a little bit of latitude in compliance with that. Technically, what should be in the RPZ is really nothing. You shouldn't have public roads, you shouldn't have parking lots, you shouldn't have buildings, you shouldn't have but they really only started heavily enforcing that, say, over the past, 10 to 15 years. In a situation like yours, when you have an active runway and you've got two public roads going through the RPZ and the north end, they provide some latitude on that. But understand that if and when you close that runway because of the pavement condition, and when you want to then reconstitute it or reconstruct it and recommission it, the FAA, there's a high probability that they're going to come back and say, yeah, that was before. Now that you're recommissioning this runway, you're going to have to meet those criteria. Which means
shut it down. You don't mean like shut it down to redo it. Shut it down, it's closed.
Yeah, it's okay if you're shutting it down to reconstruct the runway itself, but if we're talking 2026, having the payment potentially could be starting to fail based on that model, and let's say that funding is even available from the FAA, probably not till 2030, 2031, there's going to be a gap of years at that point, in which case the FAA reasonably would look at that as saying you're almost reinstituting a new runway, in which case you're going to have to meet all the criteria. The implication of that is that yellow area would need to be cleared. Those roads would actually have to be moved outside of the RPZ in order for that runway end to stay where it is. Or else you would have to move the runway further south, in which case that whole yellow trapezoid moves down into the area, which again, effectively is a shortening the potential of that runway. And then the last point again is those hotspots. There's 3 hotspots on that runway. Really, 2 of them are facility based, which are 2 and 3, which is just really, they're warnings for pilots that you could potentially have a runway incursion onto 321 based on the way that the taxiways are configured. If and when that runway were to be reconstructed, those taxiways would have to be reconfigured such that they were more in alignment with current design standards. So again, that's just going to raise the cost of the project. Go to the next one, but probably not talking fast enough. I'm telling too much information. In terms of operations and users, we did talk at length with the tower about it. Some of the highlights associated with that is that honestly, the tower uses the 321 more as a taxiway than as a runway. There's a couple of reasons for that. First off, the high level of activity going from the north ramp. There's a lot of back and forth in that area. They find it more convenient to be able to utilize that runway as a taxiway. They currently estimate that about 3,000 annual operations occur on that runway, which is about 1.1% of your total operations. They perceive that as being a total that is continuing to decline. As the airport becomes more busy, more of those operations are occurring on the parallels. It's just progressively becoming more difficult to operate on the Crosswind runway. They've even noted that, if somebody specifically requests to operate on that runway, they could be, sitting there idling for 20 minutes, waiting for the tower to open up a slot for them to utilize the runway. They also noted that, when 321 is utilized, it's usually in, very high wind conditions, 30+ knots. And it's primarily for GA. We've had some other reports of some larger aircraft utilizing it at certain points in the past. It's certainly not the norm. I do want to note that, from the tower's perspective, what they typically will see is if somebody's not able to land at the airport because of high winds, that will typically either go to Erie or to Centennial. We've had conversations with the FAA about this also, because we're making the case that, the crosswind's important and the like. And it's just also important to note that the FAA does fund all of these other airports around. And when the FAA is looking at these various airports, they're looking at it not just as individual airports, they're looking at it as a system. And so in their mind, every airport does not need to be able to account for every type of operation and every type of situation. As long as within the region that there are areas that a pilot might reasonably divert to, they consider that to be appropriate. So again, that just speaks to the way that I guess maybe an evolution of the way the FAA is viewing crosswind runways. They're looking at crosswinds as more from a system perspective and less at an individual airport perspective. Does that make sense? Last year, the airport did have had a survey that they solicited feedback, and then went through a lot of the details. All the feedback is included in the report. Just, some of a couple of highlights that are noted here. 85% of the responses were from single engine piston aircraft operators, which makes sense. Those are the folks that are going to be most potentially impacted by what's going on 321. 83% of them use it because of the wind conditions. About 18% indicate they use it anywhere from daily to monthly. 32% less than once a month. 34% less than once a year, and 13% don't ever use it. And then there's additional information on how important it is. 48% indicating it's very necessary. 27% saying somewhat necessary, and 22% neutral or not necessary. I don't think anybody's saying that it's not it's not valuable infrastructure. It's trying to weigh those other various factors that we had started off the conversation with. Go ahead, Ben. The last consideration is that there are a variety of competing needs on the airport. You've got an awful lot of pavement. You've got a lot of maintenance that needs to be, that's required. And there is limited funding available from the FAA, even though I know that the airport's done a great job of leveraging that, and they're going to continue down that path. The costs are only going up for pavement. And the prioritization, it's incumbent upon the airport to prioritize, where the biggest bang for the buck is on that. So it's not just Rocky Mountain, it's other airports are having to make hard decisions on where do we invest our limited dollars that is going to bring the biggest value, or to the greatest value to ourselves, to our operators, and to our long-term sustainability, because funding from the FAA is not generally increasing. So again, and then limited funding is prevalent for any airport when it comes to crosswinds. Back to the next. So the report also provides 3 alternatives that we had looked at, and there's a lot of information in there, so I'd certainly encourage you to look at that. We did want to touch base on the goals that were identified in the strategic business plan, 3 of them in particular. One is that, we want to ensure safe operations and a well-maintained airfield, and trained and responsive staff. We want to drive growth in diverse aviation sectors to achieve sustainable airport revenues and economic development for the region. the airport's gonna be, it's progressively gonna fall more on the airport to fund itself as the FAA's funding tends to be more flat. Inflation is it's just eating away at at the purchasing power. And then investing in infrastructure that supports the long-term strategic growth of the airport. The airport is in a great position. And it's have lots of interest in development on the airport. The airport needs to continue to try to leverage that because that's, a lot of the future and specifically in terms of the financial viability. So alternative one, I think these are pretty, simple alternatives. Alternative one is reconstructing a runway in place, 3,600 feet by 75 feet that maintains it at, of an RDC of a B1, which is kind of a King Air 200. Challenge with this, again, $14 million, having to decommission Bravo, having to realign or having to boost up the taxi lane to create that taxiway requirement going to the north ramp. We still have to deal with the hot spots. The RPZ is still an issue. The RVZ is not on there, but the RVZ is still an issue that's gonna pop up. The next. Alternative two, do we shorten the runway? Do we bring it down to an RDC of A1 small, which is that percentage of the crosswind, that 0.68% that is deficient? What we've shown here in this graphic, we've got actually two alternatives associated with this. One is if we were to shorten the runway and have the safety area of the 321, overlap with the safety area of runway 12 right, or not 12 left, excuse me, I think that's actually backwards. The northern parallel, it is wrong, isn't it?
It is
What
wrong.
is that?
It's incorrect.
Okay, typo. It is draft. I just want to clarify, okay? But we can get about 2,100 feet in at that point. Challenge with that part of it is that we lose that ability, the tower loses that ability to use then the runway as a taxiway because we would actually have to decouple it. So you still have to then now look at probably reconstructing Bravo, maintaining Bravo, but reconstructing it because the tower still needs to have that taxiway. So there's costs associated with that. We also looked at the potential of just converting the runway to a turf runway. And in order to make that happen, we couldn't have the runway jumping over, taxiway alpha. So we had to separate that further. We figured we could maybe get about 1,670 feet. If we wanted to go pure turf, certainly that would be less expensive. Challenge with the turf runway is that it's not typically available, 12 months a year. Clearing it in winter conditions, during heavy precipitation, when probably this runway is going to be more active, you're going to start getting rutting. And particularly when you start looking at transient pilots that might be coming in here, we all train on turf runways and the like, but you're never sure how good a turf runway is. And frankly, I wouldn't land on a turf runway unless I was confident that I knew it was a well-maintained turf runway. So there's some challenges associated with that for sure.
Do you have a cost associated with the paved?
Yeah.
And the reconfiguration of the taxiway?
Yeah, so what we had estimated was about in the $10 million range at this point, because we still have to take up an awful lot of pavement. We have to reconstruct Bravo. And there's a variety of other factors that go into it. So it's certainly less than alternative one, but it's still pretty.
And that's assuming BFA doesn't pull the trigger on the RPZ.
Right, exactly. So I would say the benefit of this also is you don't have that RVZ issue because they're not interconnecting runways. So that part of it goes away, but yeah.
On field, that goes away.
Yeah, but the RPZ, the part to the north, that still would be prevalent. And if the runway were to be closed, and from a practicability standpoint, I think relocating both of those roads is probably not available, to the airport. I would probably say that's safe to say. And even one of I think that building to the north, technically a corner of it actually sits within the RPZ. To meet it, the FAA could drop the hammer on it and just say, you got to get it clear or else we're not going to commission the runway.
And
I'm not saying they would, but they
Get out the
could.
dynamite, just start blowing it.
Is 1,500 or 1,700 feet really viable anyway?
That's the question. Right. So alternative three, and this goes to the potential decommissioning of the runway. And this graphic right now is just really reflecting the way that the airport is currently operating. All the blue areas are all the object-free areas that are associated with, with runway 321, but also with taxiway Charlie, Bravo, and the taxi lane, as well as the taxiway Alpha. The RVZ is that angled line that goes, that cuts across the top. And you see where that kind of cuts through. We actually are showing aircraft currently positioned within the RVZ, which is okay until somebody
It's not.
drops a dime, until it's not. But that's how the airport's currently, operating. We're showing a JSX, aircraft in that area, which is technically where it should be operating if it's going to be outside of the RVZ. We are showing actually some development that's being proposed with respect to some, reconfigurations of the parking lots and the like. But, this is how the airport is currently operating. So,
And what would that cost to remove all of that infrastructure and then develop new infrastructures for, any other type of new development?
So depends on what type of development we're talking about. And we can go to the next slide. And so, a lot of what we're talking about here, and the big caveat on this, okay, big caveat. As I mentioned, we're looking at this from a planning perspective, master planning perspective. When we look at master planning, we are looking at big swaths. We're looking at, long-term potentials. And so you'll notice in this configuration that we are showing the potential decommissioning of the runway, as well as potential either relocation or utilization of other areas that are currently occupied by tenants. That's what we typically would do in a master plan. I'm not saying this is what needs to happen. I'm just showing what opportunities might be presented to the airport when it comes to the, expansion of commercial service operations. This is only one opportunity. It could be general aviation. There could be any number of different things that you could do with that land if that runway were to be ultimately decommissioned. To answer your question, in terms of, what that would cost, again, it's a function of how much pavement, what the requirements are, but what I would say, it's probably, we estimated just pavement removal and some other elements, probably, $2 million, in that ballpark as base infrastructure. But when it comes to development of the apron, and the potential of development of a terminal or a parking, and or the redevelopment of, say, the north end of the runway that could potentially then accommodate an additional tenant or relocate a tenant, however that goes. Things with the ironic part about that, with the decommissioning of pavement and or development of new things, is that you may actually compete better for FAA dollars when it comes to decommissioning of it, because there is a safety consideration on that. You may actually get some money from the FAA when it comes to pulling pavement out, which I understand the irony of that, but it's the truth. And when it comes to the development of these other types of, activities, you're much more obviously have to, be able to solicit, private investment. And that actually speaks to the next slide, Ben, if you want to go to that, where you look at that same kind of an area, you might be able to do, GEA hangar development, and that could be big hangars, that could be T hangars, that could be, you tell me what you want and I'll make it work in there. But each one of those blocks conceivably would be, a private investor. So those would be dollars off airport that's not, required from the airport to come in, and that would be brought onto the airport. So the diversity of opportunities in terms of bringing additional investment in, expand when you're looking at something like this. And that's just the reality of it. In this particular configuration, this shows about 246,000 square feet of hangars, but it could be anything that we could be interested in. Sorry, go ahead.
Both had the purple up top, relocated tenant. Which tenant? Is that a specific one or is that open?
It could be.
All the guys, the new colors are replacing.
Is there a lot in there density wise? Oh God, that's what good.
There's a flight school located
Good
there.
thing Boom's not here. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
We're not presupposing a conclusion, but it's just purely
It's gonna be way down on the other side.
Centennial.
Yeah, Centennial.
we're simply looking at it from, if we're going to be developing that area where the runway is, what makes the most amount of sense? If we were to try to either move somebody or move, and again, this is, typically in a master plan, we're looking at a 20-year window. for these types of.
So
these
pretty
types
much anything you do here, it would require taxiways at least to access.
Yes,
So there's some minimum development cost for the.
there will be, yes, yeah, and again, it's a function of what it is that we're looking to do. Like it was the commercial version of it, we had, what we did in that was to boost up Charlie. And, we would probably have like a bypass on it just to accommodate, potential, head-to-head, traffic, somebody coming out, somebody going in. We create some sort of a bypass associated with that. In this configuration, given the size of the aircraft, it could be the potential of having a new taxiway Bravo that would be a parallel on that. That's not an absolute, because those bypasses might be able to work with that, as well. So what these are reflecting is just hoping to maybe describe some of the opportunities that might be presented to the airport if the runway, couldn't be reconstructed. Go to the next slide. So this is not a scientific decision-making tool or anything like that. This was just really an attempt to look at some, basic criteria that we would, ordinarily look at within the master plan related to things like, operational safety, efficiency, financial sustainability, in your case, consistency with the existing, the business plan. And there's any number of different ways of gauging each one of the things, but we did want to just highlight a few of the key elements, and that is, going across from various alternatives and in each one of these criteria, from a safety perspective, alternative ones, 1 and 2 provides the recommended 95% wind coverage for small aircraft. And alternative 3 does not. It's deficient by 0.68%. So that's a factual statement. From an efficiency standpoint, alternative 1 maintains the runway use flexibility as it's being used as a taxiway, which is an important consideration for the tower. So as a side, what we try to do is, with the green, those are positives, yellow were kind of neutral, and red were kind of negative. But anyway, jumping back into the efficiency, alternative 2, we maintain the runway use flexibility. We decouple the runways, which is kind of a good thing that the FAA looks at. They like to look at that, but we do lose the ability to, use that that runway as a taxiway, and we'll have to reconstruct Bravo to make that work. Alternative 3, again, we lose that runway flexibility, but it does improve the redevelopment potential for the area. Financial sustainability, no way around it, really. 1 and 2 is going to be on the airport's dime, if that's going to happen. Alternative 3, you're likely, again, ironically, to probably secure some funding from the FAA for the decommissioning of the runway, but you'll also more than likely be able to identify partners for future development opportunities as this moves forward. And then consistency with the business plan. The airport is an economic generator for the area and needs to continue to grow, not only in that capacity, but also to generate additional revenue streams, because progressively, as the FAA funding, remains flat and inflation continues to go up, it's gonna fall more to the airport over the long term. So that is a reality that the airport needs to be considering. So I talked a lot longer than I thought I was going to. I was talking pretty quick, but
I have a question. Thank you.
So let's let the board ask a few questions first, Daryl, and then we'll open it. Well, it'll be up to Phil if you want to open it up.
So the one thing that I wonder about is, like, when does the decision need to be made? Right, with this in front of us now, but what I want to understand is, what is the development proposal for that area? Because that's what and if that's years away, you could ride this out for a while, right?
We could ride it out. And again, if I misspeak, Jim, please correct me. We could ride it out till 2026 when the runway fails.
Yeah.
At that point, the FAA, our 139 certificate would say, so we got 3 years to decide.
Yeah.
If it doesn't fail because of the winter, I can't remember who asked that question. Did it degrade further and it actually is worse?
Are you saying, Dave, is there kind of an in-between? Let's say we decide it's gonna fail, we aren't gonna fix it, but how much, if we close it in 26, we can write, what's our time frame actually to get into a development plan? We don't necessarily have to do something immediately. That,
Yeah, I guess I'm just asking, right, like, if, I guess I like, relatively finite choices, like, what is the development plan for that area? Just making a decision now in 2023 that we're gonna, you know, tear up that runway 3 years from now or whenever, might be premature if we don't know what we're gonna do with that land.
Well, I don't think private industry wants to make a decision to do development, not knowing if we're going to tear it up or not. So when we finally make a decision that it's going to be closed and not spend any more money on it, then we have the opportunity to invite people in to do development. And that won't happen without that.
That was almost as good as how I was gonna answer it, Randy, but, so thank you for that.
I was gonna say about the degradation of, because of this last winter, Paul did such a great job. He had the snow off the runway before it even hit it.
Stuff to do. But I have people, corporations, hedge funds, the whole, coming to me pretty regular saying, when can we develop the south side? And that's tied to Sims, which is being moved now, taxiway Otis. And also, when's, is that going to be available? And when can we, start developing it? So Randy nailed it on the head. When we make the decision, then I can go, that decision has been made. We can now, entertain, the offers and what meets the strategic business plan goals.
Decide what we want first.
Well, that's what I was wondering is do you have sort of a preferred, development view of that area, commercial terminal or, whatever it might be? And that, and understanding that there's sort of viable partners, investment partners to do whatever it is you think is the right thing.
So we have, and I don't remember who it is, members of the strategic, or, Airport Advisory Board working on financing. So whoever's doing that will then present to the board about what those financing options are, what those partnership options are.
But that's more geared towards the south side right now.
It is, but I think, again, at least from the financing perspective, it could work for both.
Okay.
I think it's less, appropriate for the other items about construction styles and things like that, because we're talking rebuilding the T hangars and porta ports.
And I do see the tie-in, like what you decide for the north side could affect what you want to do on the south side and vice versa.
Yeah.
Range.
Yeah.
I have a preferred option, but it's market driven. And I don't ever, sometimes I do, but I don't try to put the horse before the cart. So I want to get the recommendation to the board. We'll hope for a resolution to present this to the advisory or to the BCC. That's the Board of County Commissioners. Let them know what we're thinking. And then basically at that point, I can go, okay, we know what the future looks like. Now I can entertain these calls and these visits and people saying we want to develop over there.
So just a clarity point on that too. If we decide to move forward with development, but we know that takes time, it could be 24 months, it could be 48 months. When we make that decision, are we able to still keep it operational to that point that's secured? Or when we make a decision, does it close then?
I believe, again, everything takes time. It would be my understanding of my goal to keep it open until a lease, a contract, or something is signed.
Or until it fails.
Or until it fails. And the bulldozers are lining up, on Friday. We close it Saturday and they start, tearing it up and building whatever we build over there. So, again, everything takes time. So we would keep
FAA
that.
won't make us close it. When we say
They will not.
we're done with it, it's not like tomorrow it's done.
Correct. And unless it fails, and again, that's what CDOT would come and say, hey, that runway is now not safe. But it's projected to go to 2026. That's 3 years. So I'm pretty sure we're gonna get another 2 years out of it at least. Again, weather, there's a lot of factors, but our goal would be to keep that open till the very last possible day.
That's a great point. I think that staying, keeping it open while we find development is important. Even if the county commissioners approve closing it, we can do that on a basis of saying when it's necessary, as long as we can use it.
Right.
We'll let Joe jump in. He hasn't had any airtime. Joe? Do you have a couple of comments?
Wow, thanks for giving me some airtime. I appreciate it. I know Ben was trying to block me at first, but,
I overrode him.
so, I agree with what Randy said. It was my sentiments exactly, on, discovery or, determining what we would best use that for would be after we make a decision that we're going to use it. But one question along those lines, the current leases that are there, such as the big white building that we showed move, I think it would be part of our future redevelopment would probably include some changes there. Are there any leases there that are stand in the way that would have to be relocated first that would slow the process down, or are those month to month now? Do you have any tenants there that we have to worry about?
So the airplanes are on a month to month. Hangar, that's actually B4 or B1. I'm gonna mix it up which way they go. But the hangar that is there.
Close to the terminal.
Yep. You can kind of point with it with your pointer there, Ben. Rocky Mountain Flight School is there. T-Bird is there. Commemorative Air Force is there, and Colorado Heliops is there. So those leases end over the next, I don't have them in front of me, 18 months. So again, that would be something we would have to look at, of not renewing those leases, looking to relocate some of those. Phase it in again, all this stuff will have to be made, decisions upon once sort of the big decision is made. But there are tenants there, and those leases end over the next 18 to, I think it's about 18 months, and they're all pretty much done.
Which you could do month to month or
Yes,
short term until we have a plan.
absolutely.
Okay, super. That's wonderful. I think if you're going to ask us all for our opinions tonight, I'll go first here. I have an emotional attachment to 321, but this is one of those scenarios where an emotional attachment makes just absolute zero airport and economic sense. For 1% of operations, for additional funds that are necessary, my gosh, the amount of money just to rebuild that runway, recondition it, the amount of money you must be spending to plow snow on it, the crack seal on it. Think of all those resources going to the other development of the airport, and for only, again, 1%, really overall a 1% effect on our operations. I just don't see a way to justify my emotional attachment to that runway. And, I'm absolutely for, I believe the alternative was at 3 or C here, where it's a decommissioning of it.
Maybe Paul could give you the 2-1.
What was that?
I will try to, use a backhoe to scoop up the 2-1, and you can put it in your hangar, Joe.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll remember that.
Other comments?
I agree with Joe.
I concur.
I'd like to offer as we talk about the other side, and offer a master planning view. I think there's enough information to make the decision on 2, 1, and 3, and that rehash, I agree with what everybody's saying, Joe said on that, operationally, expense, cost, everything else. But it would be helpful for us to know we're going to decommission it. And if we've made that decision, then I would say it goes right back. Somebody made the comment, but then we can think about the master planning of both sides and what uses go where. If that remains unknown, we're going to plan the other side, and then it will be a very disjointed process. And then if it became available, we say, wow, I wish we had done this here. So if we had the ability to master plan this area and the other side by Pilatus, it will be a much more comprehensive, effective land plan long-term, addressing all the types of uses that we would like to see.
Yeah, I like what you just said there. I think having a message to the existing general aviation community, the flight schools, that we've got a place for them on the south side is an important part of that decision about redevelopment.
And I think there's still that's the second piece. of planning, right? Then we sit down and, I want to keep an open mind to it is, we think it might be effective over on that side, but, there's all these uses and how we shift them around when we say, okay, now we got all this opportunity. Let's, for aviation, come back with what kind of a company is it?
Wolford Company.
Can come back and we'll have a half a dozen options to look at. I think first we would start with, in my mind, from a planning standpoint, is identify the uses and how much area we think we have. Commercial, corporate hangars, MROs, GA, all those things. And then we'd start mixing and matching and playing the lane, playing game.
And if I'm wrong, Phil and Ben, maybe, didn't the advisory board already vote based on our preliminary proposal to recommend closing this?
Yes, I think that's what,
Didn't we? We were waiting on the final.
Yeah, with the caveat that we needed more.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right. So you've already, yeah. Good job. Thank you.
thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
You can run if you want.
I don't want him to run just yet.
Okay.
I just
Well, we're gonna be respectful of people's time, so the meeting's officially over or adjourned. If you wanna stay and field a question or two.
I will stay.
Then that's fine, but we're 40 minutes past time. So, no one's running for the door, so ask a question.
Okay, you mentioned liability. Let's say the Crosswood runway's gone. We have an airplane has to land here, it can't divert. Yes, 40-mile-an-hour winds, he crashes. Is there a liability?
I'm an attorney, I can't necessarily answer, but I wouldn't say that.
It's not quite.
If the runway's closed, that's a notum item. There's no runway, so the
I would
pilot,
say it has to land here.
he can land in Erie, which is 5 minutes away.
The FAA has determined this is not a critical safety runway. Is that correct, Ben?
Yep.
And as he spoke very well about looking at airports or a combination of airports, which they should, the FAA, saying they're 10 minutes away is a runway. I believe that's a correct way to look at this.
I don't know what the minutes are, but you got Fort Collins, you got Erie, you got Centennial. So you got them on both ends of the metro.
Yeah.
I think it's a wise question, but I think the mind frame, the mindset should be, what we have to realize is we're all looking at is there's a runway there. It's gone. It's not on the charts. It's not anything. It doesn't exist. So if somebody comes here, have a look to see if there is a runway or, I think it's.
The liability question is probably not there. Once it's decommissioned.
There is no liability there. We have a very active aviation litigation division. We would never take a case where a pilot flew to an airport and crashed and said it was because they did not have a crosswind runway available to them. That absolutely never.
Thank you.
And that's a strong statement for attorneys who really like maybe.
Wait, would you back on the record? Would you defend him in his injuries?
Very definitive for a lawyer.
Stan.
Three observations. First of all, I didn't understand what the hotspot was on the north end of the runway.
There's a notice basically warning of helicopter operations. So it's not an infrastructure issue. It's just be aware that there's a lot of helicopter operations around the runway, so.
Okay, all right. My second observation is we maintain the runway. How will it affect development on the south side? As an example, will there now be a yellow zone on the south end of the runway so that we couldn't have a road, as an example, connecting the south side development or have any construction in that area as well?
So that yellow zone I highlighted in the north, there is actually one already in the south. I just didn't highlight it. It's that area is already clear.
Okay.
So there is an access drive that goes through that right now. So that area does exist today. But if the runway were to be decommissioned, obviously those go.
Right, that could remain, could we put a road across there to service new hangars the new facilities?
Well, we've looked at it in terms of if, well, obviously if the runway were to be decommissioned, actually, there is room to put some hangars down on that area down there. If the runway were to be decommissioned, actually, it become more viable.
Well, yeah, it's not my point.
Okay.
If it stays in commission,
If it stays in commission.
limit our development.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's same, I think on that side as on the north side. If the runway stays open, the FAA will view that as kind of being grandfathered.
All right, so in line with that, as I proposed before, we really need an access from Wadsworth Boulevard to that south side development. Because it will add about 3 miles additional driving for people coming off Wadsworth into the airport. And I've not heard that coming up in the master planning at all. But to me, that's essential.
So you will have access via 112. You'll drive past past Westwoods, and then there's a golf course that I can't recall. You're gonna turn north on New Sims, and there will be access at Control Tower Road, and there will also be access farther north up towards 128.
Yes, I understand, Paul, but coming from Wadsworth, either way adds a lot, adds mileage to that. Where, I think we should seriously look at providing access directly off Wadsworth.
How would that even occur, Stan? Like, we'd have to tunnel underneath? I don't understand how we could get access direct from Wadsworth to the south side. We have 112th that goes due west, and then Sims that goes due north. That's the most direct access I think you'll ever engineer, unless I'm missing something.
I think you're missing my point.
Okay.
I'll let it go with that.
Yeah, we can look at a map later and you can kind of show, but yeah.
It would be helpful, actually. It would be helpful. Was that your third point? That you had three questions?
Yeah, I will provide some personal observations. I think there was a person that died because of, he couldn't use the cross runway. And that was 2 months ago, when the pilot was approaching 12 left and went down in the golf course over there and got killed. I landed. Prior to that, the winds were horrific. 1, 2, 4, 2, 3, 2 winds. And I requested 2-1 because it was halfway in between the 2 runways. And of course, I told it was a 15-minute wait. I was in moderate to heavy turbulence during that period of time. So when I did finally land on 12 left, I went below the horizon. I had no choice. My airplane could not outclimb the wind conditions. So I have a fairly good feeling that that guy crashed because that runway wasn't available. Now, I understand it's only 1% of the time, but what's a human life worth?
So years ago, I was on a board of a homeowners association, and we did a slurry code of our driveways in our homeowners association. And I don't know how well that was, you know, it probably was a Band-Aid fix to some extent. I don't know whether there's such thing as a deep penetrating slurry coat that could extend the life of the runways or not.
Yeah, not to the level that the runway, which is the reason why we're doing all the crack sealing and running the gas, but those are progressively getting worse and worse. The Band-Aids, all the Band-Aids that can be applied to the pavement have been applied. This is lifespan of that. So that's what we've done in 1988. The FAA used pavement and it's having a lifespan of 20 years.
We are actually doing something, I think it's on 30 left, which is actually in good condition because it does, it kind of splats and everything up. It fills a lot of cracks, but it's not for the substantial cracks that we need on 321. We got a CDOT grant, and I want to say it's like $500,000 just a slurry coat, kind of what you're talking about. So again, maybe it's $300,000 to put a Band-Aid on, which isn't going to, and what happens is those cracks get water, it freezes, they get bigger, and it just, you know, it's a.
I mean, what I would think is that we would fill the cracks, then do the slurry coat, and hopefully that would seal it off fairly well.
And the slurry works well when you have a consistent
consistent surface. We start having those cracks, to Paul's point, still the ice, the water and the ice get into it. We're, well beyond, unfortunately.
I just talked to Kyle Heckman and he got to use Crosswind Runway when we had the 40-mile-an-hour winds recently. So somebody did use it. 2 weeks.
I don't fly in 40 knots away, that's my first.
I mean, there's the runway right there. When you look at it, look at the size of those cracks.
Maybe a master plan question. What's the backlog right now on the waiting list for EM?
600 names are on the list. It's somewhere between 6 and 10 years to get a hangar.
I hope that points, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're doing Premier Hangars, which is Tim Weens is building some hangars off of Charlie 2. We're about to sign another lease. If you look, we have a picture anywhere of the overhead of the runway. Can you kind of use your pointer? Yeah. So down in that area, they're gonna build 20 to 30 hangars. GA hangars down there. Again, remember, that's the place that $1.5 million to pave the road last year. $4 million to fill in the dirt. So they're, instead of building, the last proposal was 180 hangars, smaller hangars, kind of in a T shape. These people are gonna develop just along the taxiway as close as they can, to the object-free area and the other stuff that Jim tells me I have to, keep hangars safe, but I don't understand. And so they're gonna build those 20 hangars. And then, again, to try to help alleviate that GA wait list. Again, one of the very first projects that we're working on as an advisory board is one Otis has built, is to move and expand the current T hangar. So we have 106 T hangars, give or take. We're adding an extra 2 acres of land, so that's another 25 or 30 T hangars that will be able to get people off that list. All right, anybody else?
Say we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, a lot of information.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye-bye, take care.
Still trying to get some food here. I think they'll come within a week or so.
Yep.